Okay, so as you'll see on the first lecture for this module, it's called climate change, but really it's a module about ecology. Okay, this is really the biggest scale of biology. It's actually what I'm interested in a professional sense. My own specific research interest falls into this with, looking at organisms, how they move, what kind of habitats they use, what do they eat, those kind of things. So we started out talking about cancer. We're looking at the little small scale, the cells, DNA, transcription, translation, all that kind of things. We talked about the human body when we talked about the hormone, the endocrine system and the nervous system and stress and addiction. We talked about evolution and organismal diversity and pollinator theme. This theme is about ecology, okay? And we're going to go through, this is not a particularly exciting lecture, it's just stuff. Right? It's just mostly a list of biomes and ecosystems. I kind of feel silly lecturing because it's like you're going to have to memorize it anyways, but I'm going to go through this and see if there are different things I can point out to you. That's a problem with lectures, right? It's just kind of like, you're just going to have to read it over and figure it out anyways. But okay, so 2 types of biomes, right? And we'll go through, talk about basically the way to think about aquatic ecosystems, different types of them, and then the type of ecosystems that are found on land, and how to classify them, why there are different ones, where they're found. Right? Most of the Earth's covered by water, you know this, right? That can be split into fresh water. Thank you. 1% salt. There is some salt in fresh water, of course, and then marine type ecosystems, which is around 3%. So it's not that it's 99% salt in salt water. It's just 3 times as much. And we can break the freshwater ecosystems down to depending on whether they're moving or whether they are standing. Right. So this is lakes, ponds, wetlands, things like rivers and streams. Right. And we'll see there's very different types of organisms found in those 2 types of aquatic. Okay. Here's the words. Here's the picture. You guys, the notes are up. Right. I know you guys can read, so I'm just going to use the picture and just explain this. Okay. So if we want to break down an aquatic ecosystem into functional areas, right? Probably the biggest factor, abiotic factor, non-living factor that determines where things live is the amount of light. Okay, so we can break this down into the photic zone and the aphotic zone. Photo meaning light, no light, light. Okay, sunlight only penetrates the top part of a lake, right? You get down to the bottom, there is no light. The other part of this is the benthos. The benthic realm is at the bottom of the lake. Okay, what's it made up of? Inorganic things like rocks, broken down sand, but also all of the living things that die and kind of rain down into the benthic layer. Okay, so this is going to really determine where different organisms live. Obviously, any kind of photosynthetic organism can only exist in the photic zone. Okay, but there's a lot of animals and plants. Well, not plants, but a lot of animals who live down here in the aphotic zone. The benthic, again, is the bottom. Phytoplankton. Plankton, what does that mean? Do you guys know what a plankton is? What characterizes something as a plankton?
I'm only thinking SpongeBob.
Right. Fixation on recipes. This is basically an organism that does not move on its own accord. They're just floating around. They're drifting around. Okay. It's microscopic generally, but not always. But it's not a one specific type of organism. It can be algae, it can be animal, it can be bacteria, it can be plants. But these phyto means photosynthetic. So these are things that require the sunlight to drive their energy production. Okay. These are also the same kind of things that produce, we talked about this in lab when we talked about nutrients in aquatic ecosystems and how there are these algal blooms that can produce toxic metabolites that actually can be really toxic, can kill fish, kill dogs going swimming in the lake, right? Because, right, if we have sewage, right, what kind of nutrients are found in the sewage?
E. coli.
That's an organism that can be what kind of nutrients, what kind of basic chemicals that we can find in there.
Nitrogen?
Yeah, nitrogen, yep, right. And so we see these phytoplankton are regulated by nitrogen and phosphorus. These are things that are found in. So obviously, you get sewage, you get a high bloom of these. And then really what happens is when these phytoplankton bloom, they run out of space, they die. And then when they're broken down, it uses up all the oxygen.
Could that happen in Lake Lanier?
Does it?
Yeah.
Probably. I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, you hear about this every year, these, and it might have been, I know there was a thing on the news a few years ago about a couple that took their dog swimming and then the dog goes home and gets some kind of nerve damage or dies. It's something to do with this. So I don't know if it was in, Lanier, but.
Okay, because I got a question for you.
Okay.
I live on a boat, right? So,
You live on a boat?
yeah, it's tight. So, hold up. When I find the video, I'll show it to you.
Okay, this is some kind of.
I think it was just a large bass. I've never seen it before.
Yeah. They give off really terrible. They can give off an odor. They can cause distasteful water. This actually is a pretty big problem that people put money into. Right? I have friends that work in this business trying to figure out where this plankton. It's one thing that Kendall Bird's trying to figure out with his drones is how to use multispectral imaging to figure out where these planktons are blooming and how to control them. It's a big industry really, but it all comes down to these nutrients. Again, that's the theme of these lectures is about how these abiotic things like nutrients, light, temperature are driving the biotic things, where we find planktons and things like that.
You ever seen something like this? Right, that's just like a overview of it, right? And it's not dust or something. Because I zoom in on it right here. Is that microorganisms or is that just like, oh, you see this?
Yeah, I don't know what that is. Yeah.
There's like hella fish eating it. I was wondering if you
It's
might have
probably
an
something
idea.
alive. Collect some, bring it in a jar. Probably can figure out what it is under the microscope.
No? Oh, it happened once, never seen it again.
How big were
Microscopic.
they? Okay. So rivers and streams, these are these called lotic systems that are moving. What do you expect? And we've talked a lot about this already with the adopt stream, right? What do you expect the characteristics of this type of stream versus that kind of stream? What do you think about temperature? Cold temperature. What do you think about nutrient availability?
Not much.
It's going to be pretty non-rich. I don't know what the word is. There's going to be lots of nutrients down here. Few nutrients here. You're going to be a lot of oxygen or a little oxygen here.
Huh?
Oxygen levels. What do you think?
A lot, right?
Here. Yeah. Not a lot of oxygen here. Because it's that warm temperature. You've got a lot of nutrients that are causing these algal blooms. Right? And so, of course, you're going to find totally different organisms in both of those places. Okay. Wetlands, very important. Aquatic ecosystems. Number one, they're basically like a huge sponge. So when you get a lot of water, that water pulses across the landscape. If there's a lot of wetlands, they can hold a lot of water. They have all that layers of moss, vegetation. In dry times, they dry out and then they can soak up a lot of water. They also filter our water for us. So they trap pollutants, trap sediment, don't allow those things to get into the lakes and rivers. And they provide a lot of habitat too for different plants and animals. So wetlands are protected. They are a really important part of the landscape. So marine, again, sorry, I feel like I'm skipping all over, but I can do this and say marine biomes are diverse, ranging from vivid corals. This, you like that, Alex? No. Same kind of, so again, the diagram we looked at before was a freshwater lake. This is an ocean, but we see the same basic breakdown in that we have the photic zone about 200 meters, then we get the twilight, and then we get down here to the true aphotic zone. This is where you get all these bioluminescent organisms down here, right? We are finding just hundreds of species of new organisms down here, right? Up to 10,000, that's 30,000 feet. It's like 5 or 6 miles under the surface of the ocean, right? Incredible pressure, low temperature.
How deep's the Marianas Trench again?
It's gotta be this.
Yeah, it's gotta be that, right?
Oh my God, that's
That's
just
ridiculous.
unbelievable.
I don't even think the sky's that high as the ocean is deep.
If you went this way,
Yeah, it's only like 4 miles out, isn't it?
yeah, it's probably about the same.
It's ridiculous.
I mean, not that it's really that important, but now you're getting curious.
Yeah.
Let's see.
You can fit the Eiffel Tower inside the Mariana Trench.
What is it?
You can fit the Eiffel Tower inside the Mariana Trench.
Oh, yeah, probably many now.
Yeah, I was about to say for sure. That thing's only what,
How high is the atmosphere? Does that even make sense? What is the maximum height of the atmosphere?
most of those within 10 miles of the surface.
16, okay, 16 kilometers, 16,000 meters. So, yeah, it's definitely higher than the ocean is deep, but not by order of magnitude.
Okay, so the troposphere then is only like that.
Yeah, right, I guess that's it. So just like the atmosphere is separated into these layers. Where does the energy come from down here?
Vents, right?
Oh, yeah, okay, so part of it is the thermal energy from the core of the Earth.
And then dead shit.
And yeah, and then it's stuff raining down from these organisms dying or defecating or whatever they're doing, coming down, and then we get all these organisms. How do sponges and sea pens and all these things make a living? They filter out stuff that's in the water column, right?
They got some crazy stuff down there.
Pretty awesome, very cool stuff. Right. The continental shelf is relatively shallow. It's off, obviously, these continental land masses, but the difference between an intertidal and a continental, intertidal basically means it alternates between wet and dry, depending on where the tide is. Okay? And you're going to get very different organisms in the intertidal and on the continental shelf and in the benthic realm, so on and so forth. So you can kind of separate this into these different areas. Pelagic is open water, benthic the bottom, so on and so forth. All right. Coral reefs, where do you find them? Well, actually, yeah, what do you think of when you think of coral reef? Freshwater or saltwater?
Saltwater?
Are there any freshwater corals?
I guess since you're asking, yeah.
No.
No.
There are freshwater sponges. And we have freshwater hydras and things that are in the same group. So there's saltwater, deep water, or shallow water. Murky water or clear water? Clear. Yeah. And do you know why? Because they actually photosynthesize. They have little algae that live inside of their tissue that provide them with a lot of their food budget. So they can't live in murky waters. They can't live where a river dumps out into the ocean, right? Because it just carries lots and lots of sediment from the land. These things are really ancient because as the coral grows, the little organism, it's an animal, as it grows, it lays down an external skeleton.
Yeah, it's not, so I didn't understand that. I've always been told that it's a living thing and doesn't look like.
Yeah, no, they are animals. They produce sexually. They have male and female individuals. They acquire food, they develop and grow. That they are sort of like what you'd say down on like kind of a barely animal end of the spectrum. Sponges are even less so. A sponge, you can take a sponge and put it in a blender and then take all of those cells and they'll come back together and form the organism again. They're multicellular, but kind of barely multicellular.
Yeah.
Each of the cells is almost independent of each other. Yeah. Coral reefs, very small portion of the ocean is covered by coral reefs, but a very high percentage of the life in the ocean is found around these structures. You can see the colors. The color there is because of that algae that lives inside of their tissue. It's kind of like a ruminant. Intertidal zone, kind of organisms we find there, a lot of tasty stuff there, a lot of our mussels and scallops are found there. Also these things like sea stars. And it's a pretty hard place to live really, because again, at one time of the day you're covered with water and then it's dry. You have to maybe shuttle back and forth or be able to deal with both wet and dry areas. Intertidal. Estuary is the transition from freshwater to saltwater. So this is the area, you guys ever been, I'm sure most of you have been to Jekyll Island, drive out on that long pier, and you look and you see all this area where I don't know, what river that is coming out there, and it dumps into the ocean. And that is very different than the freshwater, and it's different from the saltwater. It's this area where the two mix. Very productive places for things like waterfowl, turtles, crabs, lots and lots of nutrients there, therefore lots and lots of organisms. Estuaries. Okay, moving into the terrestrial ecosystems. This is where we sort of start butting up against the idea of climate change and why it is important for ecology, right? And that is because we have these biomes, terrestrial biomes. We're going to look at a whole list of different biomes like deserts and forests and tundras. But the reason that those biomes are in the places they are is because of temperature and because of rainfall. Mostly those things alone determine whether you go outside and you see a rainforest or you see a desert, right? So we're going to look first about the, climate patterns on the Earth and what are some things that affect those climate patterns, okay? And the biggest thing that affects climate is just where the Earth is in space relative to the sun, how it tilts, and then how much sun energy is received above the Earth. Okay. In this picture, is this our winter or our summer in this picture? It's always summer somewhere. Is this summer in Brazil or is this summer in Georgia?
Georgia.
Okay, we have two. It's getting a little heated here.
A little bit.
I'm just going to try to diffuse because these days is very tense. Right after the elections, we have a very deeply divided country, and I just want you guys to come together over whether or not. So, what if we say it's spring in both? Is that okay?
Yeah.
No. Okay. Well, how can you tell? And really, what is it about summer is that the Earth is pointed more directly at the sun in that part of the world. Because the Earth, as it spins, it wobbles like this. Okay? And we see it's wobbled like this, so that if you go to the pole down here, how much sunlight are they going to get?
0.
This
Or
is
is
the
it all the
sun.
time?
All.
It's either all the time.
There's a man of extremes out here.
Yeah.
Nothing. All of it. here's Alaska or the Yukon. This is the part of the year that's totally dark, all day long. Here, it's like all day long. So you're getting more sunlight in the south, the southern hemisphere at this time of year. So this would be winter. Sam, you're right. So
You're
if you'd
about
like
to
to globe, if you'd like to turn around and tell Gail he was wrong, that's okay. Yeah. So this is why, and we're in this time of year where you can even feel it. I feel like when you go outside, the sunlight is not so direct and bright. It's a much kind of softer light. And so we get these longer nights and shorter days, and vice versa in the southern hemisphere. The other thing I'll point out about this, is that in the tropics, it's the same all the time. Right? It's basically 12 hours of dark, 12 hours of light all year long. Very predictable. It's not like it is here. All right? And so why are the tropics warmer, according to this diagram? Why is it always warmer in the tropics on average than it is at the poles?
More sunlight.
More direct sunlight all the time. Okay? So it's all about the angle with which we receive the sunlight. And part of it has to do, right, here's the atmosphere. This light is being filtered by more atmosphere to get to the sun, to the earth, right? Because it's an oblique angle. Versus here, the atmosphere filters out a lot of UV, filters a lot of heat energy out. Okay. And so that's temperature. The rainfall is a little bit more complex, I think, but not much. So we said here's the equator, here's the tropical area. We know that it gets more direct sunlight, so it's warm. That warm temperature, what does it do to the water? Creates more evaporation. Right? As that water evaporates, it ascends, and it's moist. What does it do? It starts to cool, and as the moisture cools, it condenses, forms clouds, creates rain, right? And so what we get is this basically, the air coming up, quenching the water out. The air is going to go someplace, right? It doesn't just go up here and disappear. It moves out this way. But because it's already lost its moisture, as it moves into this part of the earth, it's dry. Right, so we get these trade winds at about 23.5 north and 23.5 south. And then this air comes down and is very dry. Okay? And we see this, it's very predictable. These are the doldrums. This area here, where there is not the wind blowing. Right? And then this is the temperate zone where we live, that is getting cool, dry air, continental air. Okay? So the temperate zones are between the Arctic and the equator, or the Arctic and the tropics, right? And we get milder climates there. We don't get the extremes, okay? Larry just talked about this. Why is there so much rainfall in the tropics? Rainfall is driven largely by what? What is the rainfall driven by? Precipitation. See, this is the thing about climate. It's incredibly complex. If we just change the temperature of the earth, why are we going to change rainfall? Because temperature drives everything. And it drives evaporation, it drives precipitation, it drives the winds that move around the earth, right? So that temperature is sort of the driver of climate in most cases.
Do you think climate change is real?
Do I think it's real? Yeah, I mean, yes, I do. Yeah, and we'll get into that a little bit more, but I mean, what reason would I have to believe it's not if I listen to politicians, basically?
I just listened to Alex Jones the other day.
Oh, I don't know who that is.
You don't know who that is?
Alex
Jones.
Oh, Alex Jones.
That crazy dude.
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Never mind.
I got enough crazy ideas in my head. Water bodies and mountains affect climate also, okay? So we know, like, where are some of the really nice places to live on Earth? Think about climate, where's some really nice, just temperate climates? You can just close your eyes and imagine it's gonna be like 70 something every day. It rains sometimes, but not much. What kind of places are we talking about?
Costa Rica.
Hawaii.
Costa Rica.
Okay, Costa Rica, yeah, but you've got the mountains, so it's kind of cool. It's not that tropical, like, just like an armpit all the time. Hawaii, I'm thinking like Greece and Italy, Southern California, right? Why is that? Because of this, the mountains, plains, but also these large bodies of water, right? If you live right next to a huge body of water, in the winter, that water has trapped a lot of heat and is giving it off. So it's keeping you warm in the winter, and then during the summer, it's cooling down. And so it really can modify your temperatures. But mountains also, right? I'm gonna start here and then work back. So this is California, right? This is Death Valley. This is where redwoods are, right? Some of the wettest places in North America. Or you could go up into Oregon, right? And this may be Oregon, and this is like Spokane. Right? So we see very wet areas and then very dry areas. Why? It comes in off the ocean, has picked up a lot of moisture as it goes up the mountains. What does the temperature do? As we go up the mountain, what happens to the temperature as you go up mountains? Decreases. As you decrease, cold air holds less water. The water then falls out of the air. It's called rain. Right? You know what rain is. Okay. So then what happens is that moisture is now here. As the air moves on, it has less moisture. A little bit more, and whatever moisture is left gets quenched as it climbs up the Sierra Nevadas. By the time it gets over here, bone dry. Right. See, this is where you get deserts, Utah, Nevada, those things. Right. So you can kind of pick wherever you want to live. This is like the Central Valley. It's enough rainfall, not extreme rainfall like here. It's not extreme dry like there. That's Western United States, but the same story occurs all over the world. Yes, dry, wet, hot, cold. So there are places, I can think of particularly in Arizona, you can go, in one day you can drive from the Sonora Desert up to Spruce Fir Forest. These are the kind of places that you'd see up in Canada, right? So you can drive north to find cold, wet conditions, or you can drive up to find wet conditions. Even here in Georgia, or like in the Smokies, if you go up to the top of the Smokies, very, very different than the bottom of the Smokies.
I went to Arizona. I thought it was gonna be hot, but I went to like Sedona and it was snowing.
Yeah, two things going on there. One is the altitude, and the other is there's no atmosphere. It's so dry that any of the heat from the earth just dissipates into the up into the atmosphere at night. At nighttime, that's why it's beautiful. It can be 100 degrees in a day, but like 60 at night. Yeah, damn beautiful. Yeah, I was born in New Mexico. It's kind of sunny. Very pretty places. So you can look and see, based on these kind of patterns, this determines where we find things like grasslands. Right? And this comes out of the case study for pollinators, right? All the central Asia, the steppes here, Tibet, full of just grassland. Why? Because by the time we get to the middle of the continent, a lot of that moisture has been removed from the mountains. So we get tropical, or we get temperate rainforest. I don't know if you guys have ever been to like Seattle, up to the Olympic Peninsula. It's a rainforest, right? Then we get inland, we get to dry, and then we get, where's the moisture in the eastern United States come from? So it's dry there, why does it get wet again here?
The other ocean.
Yeah, the Gulf, right? Most of our precipitation comes off the Gulf up to this north and east. Okay, so point of this, bless you, that it's fairly predictable where you're gonna find these different types of biomes, terrestrial biomes, and that's all temperature and rainfall. Okay, and that's modulated by oceans and mountains. Okay, so we can see, you can predict, it's very predictable, where we're gonna find these different types of biomes. And which one of these do we live in? Broadleaf? Yeah, broadleaf. So these are the like oaks, maples, not needle leaves. They're broadleaves. They're temperate in that they fall off during the, well, not temperate is where they're found, but so that would be this one. Okay, so we have medium amount of rainfall and medium temperature. Okay, so we'll come back to this, but this is basically, again, the point is what drives the location of these is temperature and rain. So as we increase the temperatures, average temperatures on the Earth, we're obviously going to affect these biomes and where they're found. All right, this is not like hypothetical. We're actually seeing these changes. Okay, we see that biomes are shifting north. We're seeing changes in snow and ice cover. This is partly what all the wildfires about out in California is. Where does San Francisco get their water from? Where does a lot of California get their water from? It's not from the ocean. Very difficult to get water from the ocean. Well, it's not difficult to get water from the ocean. It's difficult to get fresh water from the ocean. Tons of energy needed to evaporate all that. Where does the water come from? And therefore, why are there so many wildfires out there? It's a pretty weird place, San Francisco. Look at this on a satellite. Comes from the mountains. Up here, Sierra Nevadas. Right? During the winter, tons and tons of snowfall here. Right? During the summer, what happens to that snowfall? It's just basically like sending nice little bottles of water down to San Francisco and all of this part of California. So as they get less rainfall or less snowfall, right, then that affects drinking water. Right? We see growing seasons changing. Right? Sometimes, now this is not to say it's all bad, but there's a lot of changes happening. Okay? So I'm going to kind of go through these relatively quickly again because you know, it's pointless for me. You're not going to memorize them listening to me, but I just want to point out the trends here. So the rainforest, of course, is sort of driven by the amount of precip, lots and lots of rainfall, right? High temperatures, that's tropical rainforest. We do have a temperate rainforest, and what that would look like is the temperature range would be down here, but we'd still have a lot of precipitation. Okay, that one's kind of obvious. Savanna, right? Think of you know, wild America and millions and millions of wildebeest, and this is savanna. Is kind of marked by or characterized by a few trees and open grassland. Right? That's what makes a savanna. And what is it that creates this kind of vegetation? It is relatively low rainfall, but very seasonal. It does rain in the savanna, but it only rains at the monsoons. So we have dry time, and then we have really wet times. here in Georgia, it's kind of like it's always just kind of a little bit dry, a little bit wet, right? So the rainfall is distributed throughout the whole year. Places like this, you get monsoons and you get a dry season. And then high temperature, and it's also characterized by a fire disturbance. Okay, and that keeps the trees down. Deserts, there are cold deserts, there are moist deserts, there are hot deserts. The thing that makes it low rainfall, very low total rainfall. Okay. I lived in Aruba for a little while, and Aruba kind of looks like this too, because it is out in the Caribbean next to Venezuela, and the rain just passes right over Aruba, and then it falls in Venezuela. So it's very moist, the temperatures are high, and the air is constantly feels really humid, but it doesn't ever, hardly ever rains there, okay? So this is, again, deserts are all about that low amount of rainfall. Chaparral, these places are characterized by fire. Fire is not a new thing in California, right? Or in the Mediterranean or in South Africa. It's just how much fire happens and whether there's a bunch of houses mixed in. But we see, again, here is rainy winters and hot, dry summers. So again, that seasonality of rainfall. And then also the fire. Okay. Temperate rainforest. Again, not hot, not dry, and not totally soaking wet, and not bone dry either. Coniferous forest. It's cold, but has some rainfall. Now, there are places that are cold that don't have a lot of rainfall, and these are the tundra, okay? And probably the thing about the moisture here is that it's not necessarily that it doesn't rain, but that the water is not available to the plants because it's frozen. Ice is water, yes, but it's not going to be usable by plants. Okay? So it's basically like it's dry. And then polar ice, that's because it's cold yet. Okay, two more quick things. Water cycle. Okay. Again, this is really key to all the stuff that we've been talking about up till now. That this determines where you find different kind of vegetation. Okay, and we've looked at this quite a bit too through a dot stream. But obviously, as the temperature of the water increases, we get a lot more evaporation. We get a lot more energy in the atmosphere. This is why, if you guys watch during hurricane season, and how do you suppose they predict whether this hurricane is going to turn into a Category 4 storm before it hits the land? Right? They see a hurricane out in the ocean. How do they predict what's going to happen to that storm? Is it going to grow? Is it going to shrink? What's the major factor that determines how storms behave? Temperature. Yeah. So they look at the surface temperature of the water, and if this is really hot, it's going to continue to pick up energy, right? And so this is how the warming Earth is affecting things like storms, right? And then that creates, pressure differences create wind. And then we've talked about this infiltration, about precipitation can run across the surface and run down through rivers, but it can also penetrate the earth, create aquifers down here. This is things like wells and aquifers, right? And that will eventually move through the earth too and find its way back to the ocean.
Is it true that this is the greenest the earth has been in thousands of years?
The greenest? Well,
Like most foliage and stuff like that.
I don't think so now. Now, maybe if there weren't humans here, there would be.
Yeah.
But humans have really taken a large portion of the earth and converted it from forest to agriculture. So, I don't know, on the big scale, I would say probably not. I would say probably not. This is one we're definitely going to come back to, okay? Because this is at the heart of climate change and this idea of a carbon cycle. Now, there's a bunch of other cycles in your book, phosphorus and, oh God, I don't even know, all these other, basically watching the movement of these organic chemicals through the inside of the biosphere. The biosphere, again, the Earth is a closed system when it comes to nutrients, right? There's a little thin layer on the outside of the Earth, that's the biosphere. There's not new chemicals raining in from outer space. These chemicals, like carbon, don't go out into outer space, okay? They stay here, but they're transferred. They're moved from one form to the other, okay? And so this is where we get these cycles. And to me, this is kind of like reincarnation, right? You could be a carbon molecule in a rabbit, and then when you die, what happens to you? Right? Bacteria and things break it down. That's respiration. So you go from sugars to carbon dioxide. And then when that carbon goes into the atmosphere, what happens to it? Carbon dioxide in the atmosphere can then be taken up by plants, right? Remember this? Take carbon dioxide and build it into a big energetic sugar molecule. So we have this kind of back and forth between animals and their carbon bodies. We're made of carbon. We are a carbon-based organism, right? All of our fats and sugars and proteins are made out of carbon skeletons. So we have this in living things, transfer of carbon dioxide, but then you also can have this old dead things be buried and to be fossilized into things like coal and into oil and butane and natural gas. All of that is old dead animals. It can be leached off. It can run off into the oceans. Right? The soil is full of carbon. The ocean is full of carbon. Right? So we have a cycling between the atmosphere and the ocean, between the atmosphere and the land, between the atmosphere and the soil. Right? But what's the one kind of new thing? This has been happening for 3.5 billion years. There's been living things. What's the new thing on this diagram? New in the last probably 400 or 500 years.
New what?
A new arrow on here. A new sort of element of the carbon cycle.
I guess the fossil carbon. Right? The oil getting.
Okay, yes, right. This part.
Yes.
Because where did all the energy come from to drive cars, to drive factories, to drive production, to drive building? Where does all that carbon come from?
Dead dinosaurs.
Largely, yeah, dead dinosaurs and plants and stuff. So we're extracting. This was then locked up here. This carbon has always been there. Right? It's not that humans created the carbon. What we're doing is extracting it from the earth, burning it, and putting it into the atmosphere. Okay. So that's where we're headed, to say, okay, is that enough of an input to really affect the climate? And how would it affect, like logically speaking? What's the evidence for that? And how would having more carbon dioxide in the atmosphere lead to temperature increases? Right? But it comes down to this specific cycle here. All right. So that is the second lecture. So this one I'm going to say, make yourself some flashcards of those different kind of biomes. This is a lot of it. It's just like basic vocabulary, not a really conceptually difficult lecture. It's just bulk of stuff that you got to learn. Okay? That will be on that in next exam. All right, folks, thanks for your attention, and we'll see you again soon.